10 reasons why we must not remain in the EU. What if we remained in the EU? With it looking ever more likely that Theresa May won't be able to get a deal from the EU that the UK can agree on, then it increases the debate to remain in the EU after all, now that the public knows the facts of leaving. This would only occur if Labour got elected and if we had a second referendum with an option to remain, and somehow Remain won. So Remain wins, Brexit is cancelled, and we can all just get back to normal and not have to worry about leaving the EU anymore, right? But a vote or decision to eventually remain in the EU might not be as rosy as you think, and here's 10 reasons why. Number 10. Hate crime. So before the EU referendum in 2016, the hate between Leavers and Remainers got so bad that the MP Jo Cox lost her life. In more recent times, we've seen mass protests over the imprisonment of Tommy Robinson. Why? Because people don't like it when the establishment covers things up in favour of an agenda they don't agree with, which an eventual Brexit stitch-up would be. For some, the lines between anti-immigration and freedom of speech can blur into racism and hate crime. The country is pretty angry with the state of politics now, and hate crime since the referendum is up. Just imagine the situation should the criminals amongst our society be made angrier. Number 9. Northern Ireland. So the biggest sticking point of Brexit right now is what to do with Northern Ireland, given it's the only part of the UK with the land border with the EU, but that border cannot be a hard border. But the UK also wants different customs rules to the rest of Europe, which means nobody knows what to do, making negotiations longer and pushing the UK closer to a no deal. It almost became a choice for Theresa May to either keep Northern Ireland in a customs union or create a border in the Irish Sea, and if we did remain, that won't ever be forgotten. Nor will the English, Scottish and Welsh forget how one part of Britain is holding us into either a Brexit in name-only offer, or a no deal, or Remain. Either way, because of Northern Ireland, somebody will be unhappier as a result of Brexit, regardless of whether we remain or not. This leads to growing resentment from Northern Ireland to the UK and back, regardless of whether we leave the EU or not. Number 8. Scotland. So we all know there are some Scottish people who want independence, but they had a referendum on the matter and voted to remain part of the UK. When Britain voted to leave the EU, this was reinvigorated because the SNP could then claim the Scots only voted to remain on the basis that they remain inside the European Union. But the biggest argument for the people of Scotland to be an independent country is sovereignty. They feel forgotten about by Westminster. The political turmoil is not suddenly going to get better. That affects the governing party's majority in Parliament, and the uncertainty affects the economy, meaning less money to spend on forgotten areas. So just because the UK might remain does not mean the UK will still be united. Many more factors play into the Scottish debate. Number 7. Labour. So Labour are ready to ride on the back of Theresa May's Brexit failures and pick up the pieces by winning the next election. That's where and how a second referendum with an option to remain could become government policy. But many Labour voters in the north of England also voted to leave the EU. Just imagine how an embarrassing second vote to remain would look after the years of trying to leave by both of the main parties. Number 6. The economy. One of the biggest pitfalls of Brexit is the uncertainty of negotiating a trade deal we don't yet know. But one of the biggest pitfalls of remaining would be the uncertainty created before getting there. Brexit has already cost the UK economy, and that damage, created partly politically, will only get worse. The UK and Europe will never be best friends, As for the US, goodness knows what a vote to remain would do to the special relationship. Number 5. The Tories. You might rejoice in the fact that ripping up Brexit would destroy the Tory party as we know it. But then, the alternative right of politics party that results might be somewhat less appetizing. Eurosceptics would still exist, and they might be more inclined to form a new bond with UKIP and perhaps go even further far right. Meanwhile, the Remainer Tories would band together like a more confusing version of the Liberal Democrats. By the way, we might never have a majority government again. Number 4. Immigration. One of the main reasons why people want to remain is because they want immigrants to feel welcome and understand the economic need for immigration. But actually, a vote to remain would have to take in the wants and needs of Leave voters into account. Like the Scottish referendum created further devolution, a vote to remain would still need to find a way to drastically lower immigration. Number 3. Our relationship with the EU. Our relationship with the EU has seriously soured over the last 2 years. I wouldn't expect EU laws and decisions to be made with the best interests of the UK if we remained after all. The UK has seen the way the EU considers the needs of the UK, and let's just say they don't really seem to care. Number 2. An isolated UK. The world view of the UK after Brexit is that it wants to isolate itself and doesn't want immigration. But this won't be helped if we suddenly vote to remain. In fact, it will make the political situation from outsiders looking in seem more desperate, not less so, because we would be in a huge conundrum where we had already voted to leave, but then voted to remain. Would you invest in a divided and governable country? It's highly likely Britain would become that if it contradicted itself. Number 1. Project Fear. So you might be thinking, this is all Project Fear Mark III. Well, yes, it's all speculation, and most of it, like the concerns before the EU referendum about voting leave, may not be true. But Remainers fail to notice how things have already changed. Therefore, pursuing the transformation, regardless of the outcome, is better than undoing the work already created. Just as Leavers failed to recognise how unprepared the UK was to leave, Remainers failed to recognise how unprepared we are to remain. Leavers failed to see how much the UK needed to change. Remainers failed to see how much the UK has already changed. It takes a lot more to keep us in right now than it does to take us out. Join in the debate below and subscribe.